Hello, everyone. We're here with Jay, and we're just going to do a short interview. And Jay is a long-standing supporter of Tamil Solidarity, but she's also been an activist and a UCU member as well, which is the University College Trade Union. And Jay, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you for inviting me. And I'm going to start by apologising for my voice because I've got a cold, which I really hope I don't pass to you.
Well, hopefully not. But Jay, I was going to start off by asking a few questions about UCU member yourself. And I know that nationally, 60 higher education institutions, university and colleges have been on strike. But also in London, we've seen that 6 universities have been on strike itself. So can you explain a bit about why that dispute took place and what's your attitude towards it, but also what the people watching can do to help as well?
So the strike that happened was 8 days worth of strike, which ended on the 4th of December, which was the middle of last week. And as you said, Isai, it was 60 higher education institutes across the UK. And it was on 2 issues. The first was pay and conditions, including the huge issue of casualisation, so precarious contracts in the sector. And the second was about pensions. And my position, I'm very strongly supportive of the strike. And this is the first time in a long time that casualisation has been acknowledged as a serious endemic issue in the academic sector. And we have a great new General Secretary of UCU who is now really campaigning against that. And in terms of what people can do to support it, I think solidarity from other unions makes a massive difference. You know, so many of us are facing precarious working conditions, and to stand in solidarity is a huge thing.
The example, like you said, because you had a new leadership and a fighting membership, and that has given a bit of confidence to the new people watching by. And I think we had like 6,000 members recently who joined UCU as well as a result of the fact that it's a fighting union. And so we should definitely continue to support. And has there any more further dates announced?
So at the moment, further dates haven't been announced, I don't think. But what I would say was that this action was building on really strong and successful action at the beginning of last year, which could have been stronger. And because we were under a different kind of leadership then, I don't think we got there. But now we really face a fighting chance. And yes, it's to do with leadership, but it's also to do with all of us members. So you said new members coming in, people pushing within their branches, and being in solidarity. Like going on strike is a really difficult thing when you're so precarious. A really, really difficult thing. But we're stronger together than we are individually. So I think what's going to happen now is that those unions that didn't that weren't able to go on strike, and the reason some of them didn't, so for example SOAS in London, is because of the draconian Thatcherite legislation that came in, anti-trade union legislation that came in 2016, that meant that you had to get to a really high number of people participating in voting in the first place before you could then go on strike. So even if those who voted at a really high level to strike, if there weren't enough of them in the first place, you couldn't go on strike. Those institutions are reballoting their members, I think. And then the other thing is the success of the strike will be taken forward with further dates and further action and ongoing negotiations and campaigning.
Well, thank you, Jay. And like you said, I think trade unions in UK at the moment are the only institution that you require 50% turnout to make the results valid. And that's like, if you think about it, you won't have a council elected in this country with that kind of...
we don't have our prime minister elected.
Exactly. So it kind of shows extent to the government would go to cramp down on trade union rights as well. And I think in London, we certainly felt like a sea of industrial action taking place. RMT, Southern West Railways, are taking 27 days of action as we speak. And all of this is happening in the midst of the general election, which is on Thursday. And just wanted to ask you the question of who do you think the people watching should be voting for and why?
For me, there's really one clear answer, and that is the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn and Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And there are two key reasons for that. The first is that this is as radical a manifesto under Labour as we have had for decades. And it's incredibly strong in terms of what it's going to deliver for us, the people living in this country, that we have just accepted generally as a population that we don't deserve to have, but in fact that we do deserve to have. And the second is that Tamil people watching this, Corbyn in particular, his leadership team, but especially he, has consistently stood behind and in support of Tamil rights, Ilam Tamil rights for self-determination and for justice. And because of that, I have absolute confidence that this would continue under a Corbyn-led Labour government.
Corbyn has a really proud record in terms of campaigning alongside not just the Tamil community, but also some of the oppressed communities as well. And he is seen as someone who is against racism and all sorts of oppression. But in the mainstream media at the moment, we're seeing a vicious attack on Jeremy Corbyn, accusing him of racism, accusing him, of being anti-Semitism, that not being able to deal with that and stuff like that. So why do you why is the media so offensive and going full on attacking Jeremy Corbyn on this particular issue?
It's a big question, and I'm not sure I can do it justice in this short interview. The first thing, you and I have just come from a meeting discussing some of these questions about Labour and the Labour campaign, and one of the things that was discussed was this, and one of the points that came up is that racism and anti-Semitism within that is a huge, embedded, serious issue across society, across British society, which any Tamil person watching will know from our everyday experiences. And of course, it's a huge issue in British society. We live in a country that was built on empire, on the racism and colonialism of empire, and that hasn't been addressed. So no one party stands outside of society. Of course, the Labour Party is affected by racism, but no more, and probably less, in my view, than the far right. And this, I think, we need to really understand and appreciate. The issue of anti-Semitism, well, I think there are a couple of things. I think that there are issues to do with, I'm not quite sure how to put this. There are issues in the left about, there are crude characterizations of Corbyn's politics, of Corbyn's foreign politics. And Corbyn himself and his leadership team have always unapologetically stood for the rights of oppressed Palestinians who face extreme violence from the state of Israel. And this, Corbyn really stands out as the potential next leader of our country who will recognise this and who will not collude with the state of Israel's violence on this. And that, I think, creates a lot of fear in the establishment who don't want to recognise that. And so it's easy to sling mud and to say this is anti-Semitism when in fact you have Jewish organisations such as Jewish Voice for Labour and Jewish Socialists for Great Britain, which I would really encourage everybody to look at and read up about, saying, look, this is not anti-Semitism. Actually, what it's doing by focusing on this and saying Corbyn's position is anti-Semitic, what you're doing is you're taking a focus off the real issues of racism that we face. I think those who have worked on this issue for a long time or have experienced this issue for a long time have said racism and anti-Semitism within that is not about a few people having a few bad ideas or poor morals. It's a structural issue that manifests across time, across space, and so to try to make it just about, or to not recognise that is really, really problematic. I think that while I say that anti-Semitism exists within racism, of course there are unique dimensions or specific dimensions to the different forms of racism that are experienced. I suppose to me, while needing to recognise that Labour, like any other part of society and party in society, should deal with that, we also need to acknowledge that Labour is dealing with that, and that Corbyn himself has always been actively anti-racist. This is whether he's standing for oppressed Palestinians, whether he's standing for the rights of Tamils for self-determination, whether he's standing up for indigenous Bolivians, which is how I first got to hear about him, way before he was leader of the Labour Party. So I think we just have to really look at the facts, and a lot of what we hear is noise, that's generated by the media that I think has very specific class interests and political interests in having a Conservative government win over and above a Labour government, and their interests are actually not to do with defeating anti-Semitism at all, in my view. Their interests are to do with their economic interests.
So Jay, just carrying on from, the attack that Jeremy Corbyn is facing, especially on being racist, and we recently saw a statement and also a video of Chief Rabbi coming out and outrageously attacking Jeremy Corbyn as being anti-Semitism and not being able to deal with the issue in the Labour Party, which we just discussed about. But there's this like a Hindu Council UK as well has sent a solidarity message with Chief Rabbi and again attacked Jeremy Corbyn of being anti-Hindu and being against all Hindus in the UK as well. What do you think about that?
Well, as we've already discussed, I think Corbyn's record on being anti-racist and therefore absolutely not anti-Hindu really speaks for itself. But I can understand that those who maybe don't know this history and who are Hindu might be concerned about this. I think it's really important to understand more about the context of both that chief rabbi, Rabbi Mervis, and the Hindu Council UK. Is it the Hindu Council UK or Great Britain?
Hindu Council UK.
Okay, the Hindu Council UK. First, of course, it's very important that religious groups, ethnic groups, have their own voice and speak for themselves. That's why we're here as Tamil Solidarity. However, you also need to ask what their political economy agenda is. And Rabbi Mervis has always unapologetically been a Tory supporter. And so you have to ask, is it really a surprise that he's condemning Corbyn? And as for the Hindu Council UK, you can speak about this more than me, but I think the question has to be asked, do they represent all Hindus, or is there a caste dimension to this? And I think there's very clearly a caste and therefore class dimension to this. So I think that, well, perhaps you can explain this better.
Yeah, because there has been a bit of a debate to include caste discrimination as part of Equality Act 2010, and this was actually put forward by Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell themselves to actually include this. But the Hindu Council has been very specific to cut across that and to try and prevent, and they even defended untouchability at stages as well. So I think it's quite clear to people reading it as well.
So it's so useful to have those details, because what you actually see there is Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership team actively challenging discrimination, caste-based discrimination, and trying to dismantle that within the UK through an act that would make it that caste-based discrimination discriminatory. Which is in the interest of the majority of Hindus and Tamils in the UK. And you see the Hindu Council UK acting against those interests, so against our interests, against the interests of the majority. So I think you have to ask. You have to ask who really is racist or who really is discriminatory in this case.
And I think you were right when you said that it's taking the focus away from wider issue of racism, but also the wider social issues that is facing ordinary people and the working class people here in Britain as well. I mean, and Johnson has been a bit shying away from that and been focusing on Brexit as his main slogan. But actually the last 2 days we've seen pictures of children who are without bed, that needed treatment, and it's kind of exposing some of the crises that exist within our society. And I think the manifesto, how do you think that's going to be able to tackle?
Yes, I mean, this was very poignant for me, actually, that everything, this picture of the child in the hospital, it reminded me of last year, the beginning of last year, when my father was in hospital. He had a stroke, and he was in hospital in Croydon. And I was actually looking back over some of the WhatsApp messages that I was sending friends at the time when he was arriving in A&E. And I have messages saying, there's a woman in her nightdress that's just perched by the vending machines. There's somebody who is missing one limb, just kind of standing by the door. There's not enough space. And A&E are saying it's not even as busy as it usually is. And when my dad got to hospital, it took him 3 days before they could move him to a specialist stroke ward because there wasn't enough space. They'd created an overfill unit, and 2 of the people that were there, their conditions had significantly deteriorated because they weren't able to get the specialist care they needed. We had to be there all the time to really make sure that my dad could get a space, which was only available when someone left home, or if when somebody left to go home, or if somebody died, which is awful. And throughout that time, the individual staff in the NHS, whether they were the person that was cleaning the ward, or whether that was the consultant, were outstanding, but they were so under-resourced. We were literally in A&E with the junior doctors talking about how angry they were with Jeremy Hunt at the time. And for me, this Labour manifesto and what it can deliver is connected inherently to that. We have such an interest in running our services like the NHS for us, for people, rather than in the name of some kind of market efficiency. So that's the difference. For me, the difference is we don't get a Labour government under Corbyn on Thursday, and we carry on with that kind of situation in the NHS, whether it's a hospital in Leeds or a hospital in Croydon, whether it's a child or whether it's an elderly adult, the most vulnerable people in society. Or we do, and that can change. And I think it's really important for us to realise that it can change. It absolutely can change. And we have the right to demand that it does.
Solidarity has done a number of videos outlining Jeremy Corbyn's policies in detail. And you can also find that online as well. If you look at our website, which is summersolidarity.org, which kind of goes through in detail what the policies are, and also breaking the lie that there isn't money in the economy, because we're the 5th largest economy in the world. There is definitely money in the economy to be able to provide those services as well.
And I'm going to sort of be a bit careful on this. I think that the actual number about we were the 5th largest economy in the world, I think at the beginning of last year or something. And since then, depending on how you measure it, we're like the 6th or the 9th. But the point is, we have the capacity to deal with this. And austerity is not, and never was, an economic inevitability. It's a political choice. We did not have to accept that the most vulnerable people in society had to pay for the way in which the economy had been run in the interests of the few. And we don't have to accept that now. We have an opportunity to change that now. I think Resolution Foundation has done some research that shows that if Labour puts its plan in place, then, even as radical to us as it sounds, and even as strong as it is, it still only puts us about average within the OECD in terms of our spending as a percentage of GDP. So it's doable. It's a political choice, not, it's not about saying we don't have money to do this. It's about saying we do have the money, and how are we going to allocate it? Are we going to allocate it to our social needs in the society we want to build, or are we going to just carry on accepting that it goes to an elite few?
One more question, which might be a bit complicated in the sense of the election itself. Not that I'm going to ask you to predict the outcome, because I think it's a very unpredictable election itself, but for the people watching, because it's not just about voting, isn't it? What do you think is a priority for us on the election day itself, but also afterwards?
Well, can I firstly say, before I go into answering this really important question, that I think for younger Tamils, it may seem as though Corbyn has only appeared quite recently, but actually, we touched on it a little bit earlier. He has been around supporting and standing up actively for Tamil rights since the 1980s. You can and do have a look on Twitter, on Instagram, on social media now. There's a Tamils for Corbyn discussion going around that shows you some of the clips of what he has done, and it will really give you confidence that Corbyn and Labour under Corbyn are the party to support for Tamil rights. In terms of what happens now, I am hopeful. I really think, with all of the challenges that we have in place, and we do have challenges, that we stand a strong chance on Friday of being in a position where we can get a Labour government in place. And that just gives me a huge amount of hope when I think of all the everyday struggles, whether it's in work, in family, that I'm currently facing, and I know that we're all currently facing. I would say that people have been becoming more active in the run-up to this election, which is fantastic. It's brilliant if you're getting involved. It doesn't matter if you didn't know about Corbyn and Labour, 5 years ago or 15 years ago or whatever. If this has got you energised, if the manifesto has got you energised, brilliant. Don't worry if you still need to learn the history or you don't know the history. Keep talking to people, keep knocking on doors, keep talking to, I don't know what, your Uber driver, the person you buy your milk from in the shop, your parents, your aunties or whatever, and convincing them about the manifesto. Go out and vote. That's the next thing. But that's just the start. Whatever happens, whether we win, whether it's a hung parliament, whether the Tories win, and as I've said, I'm very hopeful that we stand a strong chance of winning, the fight just begins there. And in fact, I would say that if we win, I want to say when we win, but let's also be realistic. If we win, the fight we face then could be even greater than if we don't, because there's going to be a concerted attempt to discredit and derail this radical manifesto. And when that happens, we have to organise through our unions, through coming out on the street, coming together and defending that manifesto that means so much to all of us. So I would say that's just the beginning. Stay organised, build on everything that you have done so far or that you're doing by watching this video, and ask people how they're organising and come together.
I think that's a good way to end the discussion because, like you said, get involved, because getting Jeremy Corbyn elected is only the start, and what we have to do is make sure and fight to implement every single one and more on that manifesto as well.